Welcome to the Accreditation Dialogues Round 4. This webinar is the 7th and final session. The Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health Accreditation and Credentialing Committee has sponsored over the last 18 months with our CEPH counselors, that's Council on Education for Public Health counselors, CEPH staff, and attendees from across the ASPPH membership. All these webinars are archived on our website, and we will also have written transcripts of the Q&A for each session. My name is Liz Weiss, Director of Education at ASPPH, and we have a number of handouts for you to access. There are 4. Our draft response to CEPH, you can find them in the right-hand side of your screen. CEPH's draft round 4 criteria, that's the narrative. Their draft data templates, those are Excel spreadsheets, and then their degree classification key. You are welcome to start asking your questions now, or as you are so inspired as we go through, and you merely type them in to the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. All lines are muted so we can hear the presenters clearly. We're going to give preference to ASPPH members, so go ahead and start putting in your questions. I'd like to introduce our webinar moderator, Dean David Goff of the Colorado School of Public Health, University of Colorado, Colorado State University, and University of Northern Colorado. And Dean Goff is also the chair of the ASPPH Accreditation and Credentialing Committee. David?
Thank you, Liz. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. This is our second webinar on round 4 of the CEPH accreditation criteria. Before we get started with the webinar, I just wanted to take a few minutes to say a few words about the passing of our dear friend and colleague Harrison Spencer. It's been about 2.5 weeks since he was taken from us, and during that period of time there's really been an outpouring of support for the organization and our staff, as well as the beginning of the process of sharing memories. Last week, on the first of these webinars, Dean Gary Raskob, who is also our leader for ASPPH, really said some very nice things, heartfelt things about his relationship with Harrison over the past several years, where he's been working with Harrison on an almost daily basis to help lead our association. While my relationship's been of shorter duration, I just want to reinforce the thought that Harrison was very kind, very welcoming, very professional and collegial, and really was a remarkable public health leader. He's really helped shape our association, expanding it to include all accredited academic public health institutions in the United States as well as some abroad, and really promoted the idea that our association works best when our members are fully engaged. Our members have been fully engaged in this process, and he'd be pleased to see the engagement continuing at this point. There will be opportunities to remember and share memories of Harrison upcoming at our annual meeting in March, and we hope also at the APHA meeting for those who are able to attend in October and November here in Denver. With that, I'd like us to move forward with this morning's webinar, and I'll introduce our ASPPH member counselors to CEPH who are on the call with us today. Dean Donna Peterson, who is the CEPH president from the University of South Florida. Also joining us today are Ms. Ruth Gara Bernheim and Dean John Finnegan. Dean Iman Hakim was on the call last week and not able to be with us today. And Dean Donna Peterson will share a few words from CEPH. Donna?
Thanks, David. Thanks, Liz. Thanks to all of you for being on this call today. As David said, we had a call on Friday. We had a very robust conversation. It was very helpful, and I think it speaks to the spirit of the partnership that we've enjoyed through this entire criteria revision process. On behalf of all of us on the Council for Education and Public Health. I really thank all of you. I thank all of our colleagues at ASPPH. Harrison Spencer certainly was a fierce champion of this process being about quality of education, about transparency, and about it being an open and engaged process. So I completely agree with what you said, David. I think he'd be very pleased at the level of involvement that has characterized this entire process. So this is our last round of comment. The draft response is available to you if you haven't seen it. There is certainly time to get comments in either for the ASPPH collective response but also on your own. And we really do like to hear from our colleagues out in the field. It's very, very important, especially in this very last opportunity that we get this criteria to reflect what we all believe is the path forward to excellence in education. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. With us today from CEPH is Ms. Molly Mulvanity, who's the Deputy Director. So thank you, Molly, for joining us, working so closely with us on all 4 rounds of this project. And David, back to you for the update.
All right, thank you, Liz. Please go to the next slide. This slide represents where we are in the process. We're almost complete with the process of responding to drafts of the new criteria for accreditation. This represents the near finish of a process that's been going on for about 18 months now, since March of 2015. During that period, we've made a lot of comments to CEPH, and they've really done what I think is a fantastic job of responding to our comments. They've adopted many of them, in fact, I believe most of them. And the ones when they have not, they've provided very thoughtful responses back regarding their decision not to adopt recommendations that we've made. The draft of the round 4 response that we circulated last week is a document we would like your comments on today. This is also an opportunity to make additional comments that you'd like us to incorporate into our response. You can kind of view this as a last pass at the accreditation criteria. Once they are released in final form later this fall, they'll be our guiding light for accreditation for at least the next 5 years. Next slide, please. So our association has been highly engaged in this process, and this slide, which I won't read, lists all the different formal groups that have been charged with reviewing the criteria, and in this process we've had numerous representatives of our schools and programs who have participated actively in the review process and submitted comments to ASPPH for submission to CEPH. I want to thank all the chairs and members of all these committees and working groups that have participated in the process. Next slide, please, Liz. So this slide shows the organization of the criteria. The highlighted sections are the ones that we're focusing on primarily, and especially areas C and D, resources and curriculum. Those are the aspects of the criteria continuing to receive the most focused attention in this round. Next slide, please. So our engagement is very important. Your responses are very important. You can respond directly to CEPH as shown on this slide. We'd also ask that if you do that, please submit your comment to ASPPH as well, so that we'll know what you're submitting and can consider incorporating it into our group response. Next slide, please. So Liz, I'm going to turn it back over to you to run through the questions.
All right. Well, we had a hanging chad from the last webinar. We weren't able to answer all the questions, so we are going to start with one of those that came up, and you can see it on your screen. And this refers to a change in the ASPPH recommendations document that's there, provided as a handout. And even though you can see it, I'm going to read it because I know some of you are joining us by phone only. So it has to do with how we are recommending to define concentration, which we thought needed a little more clarity. So we're proposing that the definition says concentration refers to any area of study that the school or program advertises as available to students via its catalog and or website. Tracks or foci within concentrations are not considered separate concentrations. For example, an MPH in epidemiology is a concentration. An MPH in epidemiology with focus areas in chronic disease and infectious disease would be 2-1. Oh, there's a little typo there. That should be
1, right?
It should be 1. Yes, yeah, that represents some strikeout. Very good. Should be 1 concentration, epidemiology. And then the rest, actually, I should have deleted. So the question is, would you say concentration is synonymous with specialization in the recommendation?
And this is David Goff again. In all of our documents leading up to this point, we've really made concentration, specialization, and focus area synonymous terms. And I believe that's comfortable to CEPH, correct, Molly?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If I might highlight just one nuance, because I definitely appreciate this comment. This comment does represent ASPPH recommendation that we change an approach that's in the draft criteria. So the sort of probably the confusion came from the strike through that was originally on this text, and our proposal in the criteria had been that a situation where there was chronic and infectious disease epidemiology would be 2 concentrations. And the ASPPH proposal is that they be 1. And, you know, we're absolutely happy to talk about that. I certainly see the logic and why that's being proposed. I think the issue that we're a little bit sensitive to is we don't want to create a situation where folks can sort of have a proliferation of offerings and sort of backdoor their way into it by saying, no, 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 this is a sub-concentration, not a concentration. I think there are ways to get around that and to sort of you know, sort of create that, in other words, that CEPH would be able to say, no, you're pretending that those are sub-concentrations, but they're really not. So I think that's something we could discuss, but I just wanted to highlight, I understand absolutely what the comment is that ASPPH is mentioning there, and I appreciate it, but I want to highlight the challenge, the sort of the reason that we had said, you know, just basically in the name of transparency, if you tell students you can specialize in this, bam, it's a specialization and has the related attendant requirements, so that folks don't sort of, you know, just sort of have a proliferation without backing them up with appropriate coursework and resources, et cetera. So, yeah, again, just wanted to highlight that particular issue.
So this may be worth a little bit more discussion. In the current resources, it would, if a school had a MPH in epidemiology, there would be a requirement for 3 faculty members at minimum to support that concentration. Under the current proposed criteria from CEPH, if a school had a chronic disease epidemiology and an infectious disease epidemiology concentration, would that now be 4 faculty members needed to support that, given the ability of faculty members to participate in more than 1 concentration?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, David. It gets complicated quickly, which is partially why I think the resources criterion is the one we're really probably grappling the most with at this final pass. So the first number that you would call out, if we were going with the way things are in the draft, not in the suggestion here, the first number you'd come to is 6, right? 6, 3 for chronic, 3 for infectious. But then we have some stipulations about how you can count individuals to constitute those 6. That is, you can repeat each individual who's a primary faculty member no more than once. So you start replicating, let's call them A, B, and C. You could fill A and B also in the second row. So you've got, in essence, A and B serving as the primary faculty members for positions 1 and 2 of those 3 positions for each concentration. So again, a little bit complicated, but then you would have 2 other individuals constituting that 3rd position in each row for a total of 4 individuals for those 2 concentrations. A lot of math, but David is absolutely right.
Okay, so the difference here becomes particularly apparent if a school wants to, or a program, I suppose, if a school or program wants to have several tracks within an area. One can imagine chronic disease epidemiology, infectious disease epidemiology, maybe injury epidemiology, maybe global health and epidemiology. If a program went down that road under one way of counting faculty, they would kind of run out of opportunities to count those initial faculty more than once because they can only be counted twice. And so if there were more than a couple of subtracts within a concentration, then the number of faculty increase more rapidly, but then that also reflects the reality that that school or program is trying to provide a greater number of specialized degrees within an area like epidemiology or environmental and occupational health or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, David, the way you put it, because you're highlighting the exact issue that we wrestle with. Is sort of the sides of the seesaw or whatever. So on the one side, we want to encourage, to allow folks to be flexible. On the other side, we've got that quality concern that if you're really having a proliferation of degree offerings and saying to students, gosh, we offer this wide array of different specializations, well, perhaps there is an incumbent responsibility to have more faculty resources, more instructional resources, more expertise to back up that wide array of offerings. So those are the kind of 2 sides that we're balancing there.
Molly, thank you very much. Before we go on, I guess I would just ask whether there's anyone else on the call, any of our CEPH counselor ASPPH members who would like to comment on this issue, or are we ready to move on?
Well, I think what Molly just said is really the crux of it. So I think there's a point at which, and again, it's kind of hard to figure out where the balance point is, but I think there's a point at which a school or program saying we're offering this array of options under one area, like epidemiology, with the same 3 people, there's a point at which that just doesn't make sense anymore. And that that presumably part of your desire to offer more tracks is because you have expertise in the faculty that then can support that.
And that would be the case you need to make.
Right.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Thanks, John. Liz, should we move on to the next question, or are there any comments in the box on this one?
There is a comment in the box, so we'll go to that. One other nuance is that the formal term, concentration, is one that requires approval by the Higher Education Commission. And in this questioner's case, it's the Maryland Higher Education Commission. And specialization is much more flexible there. Do others have this concern?
So speaking, from my perspective, working with a lot of different universities, yes, some others do have that concern. That's part of why we've made the term synonymous, because by choosing to focus, rather than choosing to sort of create some term as if there are going to be definitional nuances at different universities relating to, we're sort of looking at it from the outside in. That is, if I were a student coming to your website or to your catalog and saying, what can I study here at this program, regardless of whether they're called specializations, emphasis areas, focus areas, etc., what would I think I had the option of studying? So we sort of back away from the specific terminology and look at it from sort of the end user perspective so that we can achieve some kind of equivalence across the different systems we work with.
Thank you, Molly. That's great. And so we put up here on the screen the ASPPH recommendation as of, I guess, last week or a week and a half ago. And so we're going to take a look at that. Let me make some revisions there. All right, if there's nothing else, then we can move on to the next question that was submitted. Now we're getting nitty-gritty here. We're going to have to go into our data templates. So this is the Excel sheet, the CEPH data template on the right-hand side of your screen. And looking at the current data template 1.2c, outcome measures, there are a number of questions trying to translate how we report now with what we're going to be asked to report. First question, are we to compile data from the new data template into B21? You could look at the tabs at the bottom of that Excel sheet and see what we're talking about.
So would you like me to take that one sort of separately? Yeah, these are weedy questions, but they're good questions. So the answer to this first one, let's translate for those who are trying to click through the tabs. B21 is a very open-ended template. It's probably the most directly translatable to our current outcome measures template, although it does have some key differences. It's much more open-ended. It basically has 3 columns. What's your evaluation measure, what's your data collection method, and who has the responsibility for review. That will look very familiar to many of you who are used to our current criterion 1.2. The answer, so that the questioner wants to know if later we have other templates in our new criteria that relate to things like faculty research and to student admissions and things like that. So the question is, do folks have to replicate the information, the measures that are in those research or student admissions outcome templates later on, and move those and replicate those up into template B21? And the answer is yes. But, so the yes but, and we'll figure this out, I think, if we implement it, is this is intended, B21, what we're trying to do with our revised criteria on evaluation are keep the good ideas and the rigor that I think we have in our current criteria while walking away from some of the minutia and really tiny maybe a little bit too detail-oriented approach. So we're trying to be able to focus really on the big picture. Why do we do evaluation? Well, we do evaluation because you have a mission, you have a vision, and we want to know how you know if you're achieving it. And so there have to be incremental ways, measures that you can come to that show how you are achieving it. But we're trying to keep the picture in the new criteria on that big picture philosophy of why we do it. And so that's what B21 is. So the reason I said yes, but, is that just as in our current criteria, we ask you in some of the individual criteria, such as the one on admissions, we ask you to track some very granular things. It is possible in the new criteria that you will do something similar. That is, you will track something fairly granular in our admissions criterion to help us understand whether you're meeting that particular criterion. But that particular measure may be a little bit too granular to really gel with your overall plan. If I asked you overall, how do you evaluate your mission? You might not say, well, I count how many people who have a certain GRE score who come to my program. That doesn't really rise to the level of how you evaluate your mission overall. So if something is really truly so granular that it's sort of there to help us assessing a particular criterion, but not, sort of material to your overall mission, you would not need to replicate it here. However, we expect that the measures you show us throughout the document when we're dissecting individual criteria certainly do align with your mission in some way. So it makes sense that a number of them are going to appear in both locations.
Thank you, Molly. The next question has to do with B31. Confirm this didn't change. Still based on academic years and matriculation to graduation cycle?
Yep, B31 is our dreaded/beloved graduation rate table, one of the most complicated tables that we have in our entire criteria set, and it is identical. It is unchanged. The only thing that might look different if you put this side by side with our current one is we're constantly trying to improve our directions and definitions. So that might be the only thing you would see changed, is that we're always trying to explain it a little bit better, but it is absolutely unchanged in terms of its form and substance.
Okay, and we'll just move to tab B32, and it says we've been using academic years instead of 1 year for 20XX and the previous year for 20YY. So we report the number of students in each category for the academic year. Is that okay?
So what this questioner is referring to is our template on doctoral student progression. Again, it's basically unchanged between our current and our proposed new criteria. And the questioner is, the answer to the question is yes, it is permissible to use academic year or calendar year in this setting. What we want to do is have the definition work in a way that allows you to know who you're counting and to consistently count the same group of students. That's the most important principle to us, regardless of what month the period starts and ends in.
Okay. Nice and clear. And then tab B4.1, confirm this didn't change, still based on academic year and allowing 1 full year to pass for each graduating cohort?
Yep, so B4.1 is the template on post-graduation outcomes. That is, are the individuals who graduate from your program continuing education? Are they employed, or are they wandering around looking for a job or a thing to do with their life? And the answer is that this is unchanged, that we, again, use that year principle, whatever month your year starts or ends in, so that you can consistently count the same group of people and know whom you're counting. And we allow individuals up to a year. We think if you measure them immediately at graduation, you're not getting a truly rich data set, because some people are going to just still be looking for jobs because they just started. So we want to look at folks up to a year after graduation.
Okay, and back to B3.1, there's another question. If a student enrolls in a program but never shows up for any classes, are they still counted in the matriculating cohort?
They are not. That's an important definition. We really want in all of these templates, we are really trying to separate the signal from the noise. We want to know how many students who come to your program make it through, and how many get lost somewhere along the way, or move out for one reason or another. And so part of separating out the noise is that individuals who never show up on day one, that's not what we're concerned about. That's not part of what we're looking for in terms of why we're looking at these data. So the answer is that those individuals do not have to be counted in your data set.
There's a comment here about B3.1, the same tab we're on. For time to degree in B3.1, we added a line for attrition rate, so it's clearer who graduated and who left the program. Is that helpful, Molly?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in the future, if we hear a groundswell of folks who would like to add that row, I think right now we already have a lot of rows. It's already a pretty complicated table, so I don't think we'd make that compulsory. But sometimes, individuals have little tweaks or additions that they can make that are clarifying, and that sounds like one that would be welcome and appropriate in this particular setting.
Okay. And then another question about data. I didn't see a new template for research. Will the School of Public Health be able to include research from faculty who are not counted as primary or other? We're not involved in teaching SPH courses.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have not. One of the things we discontinued in this draft of the criteria is the massive research table currently in 3.1.1. We are no longer requiring a comprehensive list of every research project undertaken by your school or program, and I think we've gotten a lot of feedback that that will be a welcome change. We've moved instead to a more selective type of outcomes-based reporting on research with sort of supplementary data. So the answer to the specific question is yes. It is entirely possible that a school or program might wish to report on research that is undertaken by individuals who are not counted as primary instructional faculty, insofar as that is part of the overall context of the environment that's provided to students. That said, we certainly look at it in its context. So if research that is reported is not being conducted by individuals who are the primary instructional faculty, then by definition, that research is being conducted by individuals other than those who are primarily interacting with students. So we would view that in its own light. We do think it's important that the primary instructional faculty have involvement in research as well. However, other research contributions certainly do influence the environment. So it would be possible to report on those if it was relevant to the school or program setting.
Okay. I don't see any follow-ups with these. Nope. No follow-ups with the data template. So we'll go back to more questions from the question box, and folks keep on putting in your questions or your comments. We're going to move to the narrative criteria D2, MPH foundational competencies. Will the new criteria address the evidence need for public health ethics to be a required course in MPH programs. If health promotion is to uphold ethical values, then critical reflection needs to be articulated as a core competency for health promotion practitioners. Critical reflection is a key component of critical practice. Not engaging in critical reflection runs the risk of reinforcing and or not challenging dominant discourses and oppressive power and social structures, and thereby not addressing inequities and the social determinants of health. And there's a reference here. And a missing ethical competency is a review of critical reflection in health promotion. As we know, public health is now practiced by a broader range of people and fields, yet only half or fewer of current training programs require a formal ethics course. Issues in both internal and external to the field bring a renewed ethical urgency to public health. And there's a reference also for the last comment.
Okay, well that is a very well stated and well documented comment. The first thing I'm going to say though is that one of the things we're moving away from in the criteria fairly emphatically is saying that there has to be a specific course in anything. That is, we believe that the education of the future, particularly insofar as it's dictated by accreditation criteria, needs to be flexible. We hear loud and clear from our practice partners, from students, from alumni, and from faculty that there's a desire for greater flexibility, for fewer silos, for more teaching across disciplines. So the criteria deliberately do not sort of reify any one discipline as you will have a class in this, including ethics. That said, I think ethics is something that has emerged consistently. I don't think there's ever been, it's one of the things that we hear very consistently, again, from all of our stakeholders, that should be reflected in our public health core knowledge and skills. And certainly, we do have a competency, number 12 in D2, that mentions ethics. I don't know if Donna or John or Ruth, who are on the line and have been there with us in council discussions, have anything else you'd like to add on the presence of ethics in our criteria?
Well, I think that the answer that you gave is the right answer. I think from our standpoint, certainly at Minnesota, you know, ethics is certainly going to continue to play a role in what we do. And but again, I think, you know, the goal here is to refrain from too much mandating of specific things in terms of courses and things like that. But I'm not sure how you could do, for example, a general course in public health without including that aspect of ethics as well, given the sometimes not very good history that public health has had in that realm. It would seem to me that that would be an incomplete education. But that said, you know, putting that specifically into a requirement here is something that we've been trying to avoid, and so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, this is Ruth. We have had extensive conversations about ethics and how best to integrate that critical thinking into our competencies and our foundational knowledge. We believe, for example, in profession and science of public health, the very first foundational knowledge that we talked about, public health history, philosophy, and values. So we thought that was a very important capturing of the philosophy undergirding all of public health. And so I guess, as with ethics in general, I know we've been through this with our medical curriculum, when one wants to integrate the concepts of equity and ethics and values throughout, rather than doing what we really weren't not trying to do, which is call out a course on one particular thing, sometimes folks don't believe it's strong enough. But our goal was to have equity laced throughout, having folks have a sense of professionalism that was firmly grounded in values, part of the competencies and public health foundational knowledge. So the fact that it isn't a particular course, it isn't what we were doing, and the fact that it is integrated. So when you look at the policy in public health, for example, we in number 12 say dimensions of policy-making process including ethics and evidence. So it's integrated, it's everywhere, but it's not so specifically called out singly because that's sort of not what we were doing. But I don't know, does anybody else want to weigh in?
This is David Goff. I would just point out that, excuse me, I hope you can hear me. I would just like to point out that this is also addressed in the DRPH competencies in competency number 15 in line 962 in the document. Also approached similarly in the baccalaureate degrees in line 1334 in the document. So I think the concept that we would hold schools and programs accountable for addressing ethical issues of importance to public health, I think it is embedded, and hopefully people will see it as a serious expectation.
It's sort of foundational to everything we do, not necessarily and embedded in a number of different places throughout the competencies and foundational knowledges of all 3 degrees.
This is Liz. The questioner spoke to health equity, and that competency is in the MPH. It's lines 834, 835, and you'll see it here on the screen in a sec. Number 6, assess impacts of structural bias at organizational, community, and societal levels that pose challenges to health equity. So it's covered there. Any other comments from our presenters about the questions? Those on the line keep putting questions into the question box. We only have one more currently, so if there's not any more, we'll wrap up after this one. Who is going to be able to teach the cross-cutting classes that you're talking about? You're suggesting that someone teaching EPI should also be able to consistently apply ethics, and I think that is highly unlikely.
Okay, well, I think some of the deans and program directors on the call might be able to speak to this in a way that's from a perspective that I can't. I don't know. I guess in my perspective, I get to meet a lot of different faculty at a lot of schools and programs, and perhaps maybe I'm too sanguine, but I think that there are a lot of folks who are interested in working together and expanding their own fields of knowledge if they don't have them already, or collaborating with their colleagues if they do. And again, what we're saying with these criteria, and I know the message that we tend to beat, is that we're not trying to tell you you need to have classes in these specific disciplines, but certainly some schools and programs will maintain disciplinary orientation, will not sort of throw everything into a big blender, if you will, and we'll have folks teaching, in areas of expertise that are more traditionally aligned. And I think the approaches, we're going to see a whole we hope to see a whole flowering of approaches in the coming years, and we hope our community will learn from others. And so I guess I'm perhaps a little bit hopeful about the future of public health instruction.
Well, I'm a lot hopeful about the future of public health instruction. I think you said it very well, Molly, and I think what we've been working toward over these past number of years is, as we've said repeatedly, allowing for innovation and maintaining criteria that's flexible enough for innovation while also assuring quality. And these are quality standards. Accreditation is a floor, if you will. It's not the ceiling. And I think we are eager to see all of the natural experiments that can and we hope will take place. There are lots of ways to create learning experiences for students. They don't all have to be 3 credit per semester classroom based. They don't all have to be the sole responsibility of existing faculty in a school or a program. There are other faculty at the university. There are certainly colleagues out in the practice world who are very happy to engage with us. We learned this through the Framing the Future initiative. Wherever we went, we heard people say, you know, we would love to be more engaged in our academic institutions, and I think we're seeing more and more different models come out even before these criteria have been released. There are a number of schools and programs that have moved to new curricular models, and ASPPH is certainly committed to making those models available so that we can share what we've learned and share our experiences through the annual meeting, through different work groups that we have, through the networking that happens. And yeah, I think for some schools and programs, this may be it may appear more challenging right now, but there's time for folks to move into this new way of thinking, and there's time to remain sort of more traditional and find new ways to incorporate some of these new ideas. So we really are excited about the future.
Okay. Thank you both. We do have, so nothing more in the box, but we do have a couple more that we would like to hear your reactions on. And this came up on the last webinar. There's interesting back and forth. And it's C2B again, faculty resources. So it's two-pronged. And if you could just have a look on the screen or listen, and what are your thoughts? We're really interested in hearing. So employed full-time as faculty members appointed in the School of Public Health. For the purposes of accreditation, faculty members appointed in the School of Public Health will be considered employed full-time if they are employed by the institution that houses the unit of accreditation with at least 0.75 FTE effort for schools using 12-month faculty contracts, an effort level comparable to full-time effort in schools using 9-month faculty contracts. Then goes on with the school uses the university's definition of faculty. No more changes suggested in that section. Should we stop now, David, and ask for thoughts back on this particular clause, or shall we go and cover the next one as well and have it bundled?
I think it may be useful just to explain that this recommendation back to CEPH is meant to really kind of change the current draft, which says full-time is basically 1 FTE, and what 1 FTE means is something different at universities that have a 9-month contract versus universities that have 12-month contracts. So what we're trying to do is level that playing field here, saying that full-time faculty members need to at least meet the standard of that 9-month contract commitment, and that hopefully will be viewed. What we've heard initially back from CEPH is that seems reasonable. Hopefully that also seems reasonable to our members. So maybe we can move to the next one, and if comments come up in the comment box related to that first one, that may come up. And Liz, I'll try to take this one.
Okay.
So given that last slide is in place, that a full-time faculty member has to be devoted at least 0.75 of a 12-month period or full-time for a 9-month contract to the university that houses the School of Public Health. The question has arisen, how much of their effort must be devoted to the activities of the school or program? And in the current criteria, it's full-time. So all of that effort must be devoted to the activities of the school or program in order to be potentially counted as a primary instructional faculty member. We'd heard from some of our members that they would like to relax that a little bit to make it possible for faculty members who are participating in more than one school, perhaps faculty members who also have medical degrees and are involved at the School of Medicine in teaching or seeing patients in the clinic, perhaps faculty who also have nursing degrees and are involved in teaching in the nursing program, but that for them to count as potentially as primary instructional faculty members for a school or program, they would have to have at least half of their effort based on a 12-month year, 50% of their effort associated with the school or program activity. We've had some response on this already from CEPH, which I'll let Molly provide here if she'd like. And we're also interested in your comments through the comment box, and we may also hear from some of our CEPH counselors, the ASPPH representatives to the CEPH counselors. Molly, would you like to respond? I know
Sure.
we've had some discussion on this.
Yeah, and it's a great discussion. I think that this is exactly what we want to be doing is pulling apart these issues and sort of not taking things for granted. So I actually love the engagement in this discussion. So let's talk about where we are now in our current proposal, in our current draft. In our draft that's out for comment now, we treat schools and programs differently at this stage. And so, as David said, we say that in a school, individuals have to be engaged 100%, basically full-time, in the school's activities. Their appointment must be fully in the school. So we don't allow for individuals who are, say, appointed half in public health and half in medicine to count as those primary instructional faculty. The rationale for that is that, we talked about this a little bit in the previous webinar, that this is sort of one of the fundamental characteristics of why we have schools and what is a little bit different about schools than programs. That is, there is a home, there is a unit, and the idea of the school is that you've got a bolus of faculty, a critical mass of faculty, who answer to the Dean of Public Health, and that's pretty much it. Now, those individuals might have courtesy appointments or might have, some activities that they do on an interdisciplinary basis, but their boss, if you will, at the end of the day, their allegiance, their disciplinary orientation for promotion is all located in the School of Public Health. And I think that's something that we have heard over time is important to stakeholders. Again, if we imagine not the fairly large and well-functioning many schools that we have today, but if we imagine somebody trying to build a school in the future, and we imagine that school primarily relying on these kind of cross-disciplinary appointments so that everybody or most folks have two bosses, I think that's the concern that we have. That may undermine some of what philosophically we have thought is important about having schools of public health and having them, having a home, if you will, sort of for public health academically in all facets of a faculty member's life. So that's sort of what we have on the one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale, we have the very important value that we've heard, again, very repeatedly, on encouraging interdisciplinary work and interprofessional education. How I think I would say that our current criteria attempts to sort of weigh down is to say we're not saying that individuals who have those split appointments aren't important and aren't vital to supporting the concentrations and degree offerings of a school. We're saying they won't count as primary instructional faculty. But bear in mind that our current criteria say that for each threesome, every grouping of 3 faculty supporting a concentration or specialization, 2 must be primary instructional faculty and the 3rd need not be. So you can picture a scenario in which individuals with those shared appointments would function as that 3rd, and therefore play a fairly large, significant role in the school, but would not be replacing, if you will, the primary instructional faculty with the main appointment in the School of Public Health. I think that's the philosophy of where we are now. If we want to re-examine that, I think the council is open to the discussion, but I think we do have some reservations about undermining some of how a school is sort of constituted. So I don't know if that was particularly articulate. If anyone of our counselors or if David would like to elaborate, I'd welcome that.
Molly, this is David. I think that was very articulate. I think we understand the thought behind this recommendation, and we also understand the thought behind the current draft from CEPH. And I think what will be helpful for us is if the members on the webinar who have an opinion on this can at least indicate that in the comment box, then Liz will be able to tally some of that. Donna or John or Ruth, is there anything you'd like to add on this issue before we move forward?
Well, this is John Finnegan. I very much agree with this. I think this is eminently fair. And I think it assures that public health as a school or as a program is not going to be significantly under-resourced or disadvantaged as far as personnel and faculty are concerned. I think this is really quite reasonable, and although I'm a very strong supporter of interprofessional education, I don't see this as antithetical to that at all.
So, John, I just want to be clear, when you say you're supportive of this, you're supportive of the current draft language about being full-time in the School of Public Health, and not supportive of this recommendation that at least half-time in the School of Public Health would be sufficient.
No, I don't believe it is.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I can add, David, and thank you, John, I think we have to remember what we're transitioning from and what we're transitioning to. I mean, we had in the day a case where we had 5 areas that we considered core areas, and we required a certain number of faculty in each of those core areas, moving away from, as we've already discussed on this webinar, moving away from requiring certain specific courses and certain specific concentrations. We needed to find some replacement for that to support schools garnering the resources that they need to be a legitimate school. And so the base number we start with is the number we've always had. It's just not, we don't describe in so much detail what that number needs to look like, but the number is the same. What we've added now is the flexibility, in fact encouraging exactly what you're describing, and as John said, we're really encouraging schools to reach out and to connect with colleagues across a variety of other professions, not just within health, but in architecture and law and urban planning and those kinds of things as well. So really encouraging flexibility, encouraging innovation, but also trying to maintain a core set of faculty that could constitute a credible school of public health.
And just to add, this is Ruth, and supporting this notion and saying this, we spent a lot of time thinking about this because, again, we hope to encourage much, much more in sort of reaching out across professions, across schools. And this idea of the folks not getting spent out in other places and sort of rushing in to the home base of the public health program or school sort of would diminish the energy and integration and commitment we all know we need in the programs in schools. So it's trying to reach the balance and just to reassure everyone that we spent a lot of time thinking this through to reach this balance. And when you think about it, it's sort of almost minimal, because if you have to be able to sort of know 50% of someone's time and thinking or more is at least focused on the integration of your program core.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth, thank you very much. I don't know if there's any comments on this issue in the comment box. Liz, if not, perhaps we can move on.
There's a couple of minor ones I could share with you later. I'd like to fit in one more question that relates to D2. Looking at the NPH competencies in D2, we see that, as Molly has indicated, in lines 816 through 818, the traditional core knowledge areas are recognized, but the terms biostatistics, epidemiology, environmental health are not given in the competencies. A number of biostatistics chairs are concerned that the omission of the discipline of biostatistics or the other disciplines does not give sufficient description to the interdisciplinary nature of public health, and that the wording items for these disciplines need to be included. Thoughts?
We have heard that comment. We definitely received that comment, and the council really discussed it, I think, pretty thoroughly. I mean, you'll see in the draft that we did come down, we have not chosen to use those words in the competencies themselves. There is the mention of epidemiological methods, because I think no one on the council could think of a better way to say that. It is a very specific kind of method that we think is pretty fundamental to public health. So this is sort of where we've come down after quite a bit of deliberation. I think, again, we believe that all of the I don't know what the word is, all of the values, the disciplines of the 5 core areas are embedded, we'd like to think in richer ways, in more fully stated ways, rather than just the word biostatistics. We've tried to spell out in competencies what we think that means. So in some ways, I think the council sees this as a richer support of the traditional disciplinary underpinnings without using the actual terms themselves. We have heard that comment and discussed it pretty deeply. I don't know if any of my counselors on the line would like to weigh in from your perspective.
Yes, we have. We've talked about this a lot. And again, this reflects the many, many, many conversations that the Framing the Future Task Force created the space for, and from the field, from our colleagues, really trying to move toward a future that is much more integrated and applied and practice-based and gets at the essence of what the disciplines were intended to create learning space for. So you're right, Mal. I mean, we don't use those words, but everything those words mean to us in the practice of public health, we believe is in these foundational knowledge statements and foundational competencies.
Great, thank you. We do have more questions in the box, but we need to wrap up. So rest assured, we will answer you in the Q&A transcript that will come out. Give us a few days, a week or so to get that posted. David, back to you to wrap up. And if you are talking, we can't hear
David.
you. If you have
Thanks, Liz. Let's move on to the next slide. I guess I just wanted people to have an opportunity to really see my picture again. Here we go. Timetable to the finish line. We're in the middle of the review of the draft letter. The draft letter is essentially that draft ASPPH response round 4 document that you have in your handouts. There will be a cover letter that goes along with that, but that will be, basically a very brief letter referring CEPH to the PDF. This is our second webinar that you see that's occurred today. Our response is due to CEPH by September 7th, so we'll be looking for any additional comments that you might have and that others in our association might have over the next few days, so that we can get all those in by September 2nd to Liz, so that we can finalize the letter and get it to CEPH by September 7th. Next slide, please. So, we're going to carefully review the discussions that took place today on the webinar. It's been recorded, so we'll have information for it. There'll be an archive version on the webinar posted in our website. Please continue to send your comments to ASPPH. Please feel free also, as we said earlier, to send those comments to CEPH as well. And before I turn it back over to Liz, I just want to thank Liz again for her wonderful work in this area. She and other members of ASPPH staff have really done a tremendous job of helping us through this process of responding to the CEPH criteria. I think as a result, the criteria are going to be much better in terms of reflecting excellence in public health education and in academic public health for both schools and programs in the coming years. So Liz, thank you very much. Now back to Liz.
All right. Well, it's been fun. We've enjoyed these last 18 months tremendously. And one interesting mechanism is the online community. Once we have our final letter organized, we will roll it out in the online community, and that's also the venue in which we'll roll out the Q&A, so stay tuned. Some more webinars coming up. You can see here on the screen the themes and the dates. You are welcome to join, and you can sign up there by tapping into the events page. Also want to call your attention to our annual meeting. I already have the date. It's going to be here in Arlington, Virginia in March 2017, and our undergraduate summit on March 15th, the very beginning of our annual meeting. And with that, we want to thank you all for your time today, for your thoughtful discussions, and in particular to our leaders and to our CEPH colleagues for your incredible collegiality and your support for this really exciting time in public health. And we look forward to you all rolling out the new criteria at the end of October and then seeing the new future of public health. So thanks, everyone. We are concluding the webinar.